She looked straight into the camera and said it without blinking, "I'm not here to lie." Those 5 words. That's how Janie McKenzie opened her on-site interview with CBC. Not a greeting, not a welcome, a declaration. And when someone leads with denial before a single question has even been asked, you have to stop and ask yourself, why does the very first sentence out her mouth need be about honesty? Janie didn't just agree to sit down for an interview. She went further than that. She personally invited the camera crew to the property, the same property where her missing step-grandchildren, Lily and Jack Sullivan, were last seen. She wanted the world to see it with their own eyes. She wanted to walk them through every corner, every structure, every square foot of that land. The well, the septic tank, the barns, the trailer, the RV. She wanted to silence the wave of accusations crashing down on her family from every direction. Facebook, YouTube, TikTok. People pointing fingers and screaming that those children had been murdered and buried right there on that land. And here's the thing. The property was searched thoroughly. Law enforcement documented it. Investigators combed through every reasonably accessible location on that acreage. According to all reports, nothing was found to contradict the claim that the land had been undisturbed. So on the surface, Janie's challenge to the public seems like the move of someone with nothing to hide. But here's where it gets complicated. Everything Janie McKenzie said in that interview may very well be true. The problem isn't whether her words were lies. The problem is whether they were the whole truth. Because there is a canyon-wide difference between those two things. You can speak only facts and still leave out the most important parts. You can be technically truthful and strategically incomplete at the same time. So let's go back to the moment the search for Lily and Jack actually began and pay very close attention to the sequence of events, because the order matters enormously here. Janie says that when Malaya Brooks Murray, Lily and Jack's mother, told her the children were missing, her first instinct was the woods. She didn't hesitate. She went straight up to the entire wooded area, pushed all the way to the dirt road at the top, came back down the side, retraced her path, and returned to the house. By the time she came back inside, the police were already there. She didn't have her phone with her. She didn't know the exact time. She sat down on a sawhorse bench outside and completely broke down. She was sobbing, crying hard, blaming herself for not waking up earlier that morning to check on Lily and Jack. Because in her mind, if she had just gotten up, if she had just looked in on those kids, none of this would have happened. That guilt was pouring out of her in real time on camera. And it felt deeply human. But here's the detail that stops everything dead in its tracks. Janie says she started searching after Malaya told her the kids were missing. That sounds completely normal. Except, and this is the part you need to sit with, Malaya reportedly had not yet asked Janie whether she knew where the children were. Malaya had not yet gone to search the trailer where Janie was staying. Malaya announced the children were missing and, according to the sequence Janie describes, Janie was already in motion. That's not an accusation. That's a question mark. A big one. Why would someone move before being asked? Why would the search begin before anyone had even checked the most immediate location? The trailer Janie was inside. Investigators cross-referencing timelines and witness accounts will land on that exact sequence and need to reconcile it. If Janie's recollection is accurate, it reshapes the picture of who knew what and when. Deception analysts who reviewed the CBC interview flagged this dynamic almost immediately. They noted that Janie's declarations of honesty, her emotional displays, and her admitted gaps in memory create a particular kind of tension that investigators are trained to recognize. A person confidently denying falsehood while simultaneously acknowledging they don't know key details is a pattern worth examining. It doesn't prove guilt. It doesn't even imply it. But it opens doors, investigative doors that need to be walked through one at a time. This case is built on small things. Tiny details with enormous consequences. And we're only just getting started. If you want the full breakdown of what happened next, and why one specific door may hold the key to this entire case, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on. Part 2 is where things get even more revealing. There's a sliding glass patio door at the back of that house. It doesn't look like much. It's the kind of door you'd walk past 100 times without giving it a second thought. But in the case of missing toddlers Lily and Jack Sullivan, that door has become one of the most contested, most analyzed, and most consequential pieces of physical evidence in the entire investigation. Here's why. Malaya Brooks Murray, Lily and Jack's mother, offered an account of the night or morning her children disappeared. And woven into that account, quietly but critically, was an assumption about that sliding patio door. According to Malaya's version of events, that door was essentially silent. It could open and close without producing any noticeable sound. And that silence, she implied, is why she didn't hear her toddlers slip out into the night on their own. 2 small children, a sliding glass door, and according to their mother, not a single sound. Now enter Janie McKenzie, standing right in front of that same door during the CBC walkthrough. Janie points to it. She confirms it. That is the door, she says, that Jack and Lily would come out of, and then the conversation turns to the noise. Because everybody online, every comment section, every true crime forum, every platform from Facebook to TikTok, had been talking about whether that door actually makes a sound. So the interviewer asked directly, and Janie's answer, whether she fully understood its weight or not, just drove a freight train through Malaya's alibi. Yes, the door makes noise. That's it. 3 words. But forensically, legally, investigatively, those 3 words matter more than almost anything else said during that entire interview. Because if that door makes a detectable, noticeable sound, then Malaya's explanation for why she didn't hear her children leave becomes far less credible. It doesn't just poke a hole in her story. It tears open the entire framework her account is built on. Physical acoustics are not a matter of opinion. A sliding door with a warped track, a stiff latch, or a loose frame produces a scrape, a grind, or a sharp click. These sounds carry, especially at night, especially in a quiet house, especially when you are a parent attuned to the movements of your toddlers. If that door announces itself every single time it moves, and multiple people on that property apparently knew it did, then the claim that 2 small children opened it and walked out without waking anyone becomes almost impossible to accept at face value. Investigators understand this. They know that an alibi is rarely just one statement. It's a web, a network of small, mundane, seemingly unremarkable facts. Who was where, what was open, which lights were on, whether a car was running, that together either hold up or fall apart. The silent patio door was a cornerstone of Malaya's web, and if that cornerstone cracks, the entire structure needs to be rebuilt from the ground up. That's not a conviction. That's an obligation, an investigative obligation to go back, re-examine the timeline, locate additional witnesses, and cross-reference every account against what the physical environment actually makes possible. But here's what struck deception analysts most about Janie's response to all of this. An innocent person, someone with no stake in the door's noise level, someone simply trying to tell the truth, might have been at least a little alarmed by that revelation. They might have said, wait, if the door makes that much noise, why didn't anyone hear it? That instinct, that flicker of suspicion toward Malaya's story, would have been completely natural, expected even. Janie didn't go there. She confirmed the door made noise. She didn't connect the dots out loud. She didn't raise the obvious follow-up question. Analysts noted that reaction, or more precisely, that absence of reaction, as something worth sitting with. It doesn't make her guilty of anything, but it does raise a question about what she understood and what she chose not to say. Remember, the gap between truth and the whole truth can be exactly that wide. The width of a sliding glass door. The length of a single scraping sound in the dark. Because when 2 toddlers vanish from a property, and the only explanation for why no one heard them leave hinges on a door being silent, and that door is anything but silent, someone's story has a problem. A serious, structural, forensically testable problem. And investigators know it. Picture this. 2 toddlers are gone. The property is in chaos. Police are pulling up. And Janie McKenzie has just come back from combing through an entire stretch of dense woodland on her own. No phone, no timestamp, no witness to her movements. She searched alone. She came back alone. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, she says she found something. A footprint. A single child's footprint near the patio. Small, fresh, pointed away from the house. Now, on the surface, that sounds like exactly the kind of discovery a panicked grandmother would make while desperately searching for two missing babies. It sounds human. It sounds real. It sounds like the kind of raw, gut-wrenching detail that sticks in your memory forever, because how could it not? You're out there in the dirt and the leaves and the panic, and you look down, and there it is, a tiny shoe impression in the earth, pointing toward the unknown. But here is where forensic reality separates itself from emotional memory, and that separation is crucial. A footprint is only as valuable as what investigators did with it in the hours immediately following its discovery. Forensic specialists responding to a missing child scene will want to do several very specific things. With a print like that, they would photograph it from multiple angles before anyone else stepped near it. They would cast it, pour material directly into the impression to preserve its exact shape and depth. They would document the substrate. What kind of ground was it? How soft? How recently disturbed? They would measure the dimensions and cross-reference them against shoe sizes belonging to Lily and Jack. They would map its exact position relative to the patio door and the surrounding terrain. All of that has to happen fast. And it has to happen before the scene gets contaminated. Here's the uncomfortable question nobody wants to ask out loud. Was any of that actually done? Because here's the problem with footprint evidence in high-profile, emotionally charged missing child cases. The moment a community latches onto the idea that a print exists, ordinary marks in the dirt start looking like that print. People walk through the area. Weather changes the ground. Other feet disturb the soil. And suddenly the original impression, if it ever existed in the form it was remembered, may be gone, altered, or impossible to authenticate. Deception analysts who reviewed Janie's CBC interview flagged her recollection of the footprint as one of the most emotionally vivid moments in the entire conversation. And they flagged it for exactly that reason. Emotional vividness is memorable. It is also vulnerable. Memory under extreme stress does something fascinating and dangerous. It fills in gaps. It reaches for sensory details that feel true because they should be there, even when the actual sequence of events may be blurrier than the retelling suggests. That is not an accusation against Janie. That is neuroscience. The question investigators must answer is a binary one. Was that footprint recovered, cast, photographed, and entered into the official evidence chain? Or does it exist only as a powerful personal recollection? Something that shaped the early search direction but cannot now be independently verified? If it's in the evidence chain, it becomes a testable, credible clue. It can be analyzed, matched, and built upon. If it isn't, if no one formally documented it in those critical early hours, then it functions as something very different. It becomes a story. A compelling, emotionally resonant story that motivated searches and shaped public perception, but one that cannot be held up against physical reality and confirmed. And in a case like this, the difference between those two things is the difference between a lead and a legend. There's something else worth noting about Janie's account of searching the woods. She described a thorough, systematic sweep up through the wooded area, all the way to the dirt road at the top, back down the side, back to the starting point. A complete loop, alone, without her phone, in what she describes as urgent, desperate motion. That's a lot of ground to cover. That's a lot of terrain to navigate alone, while emotionally overwhelmed. And yet her description of it is remarkably structured, remarkably linear. It doesn't have the fractured, non-linear quality that most people exhibit when recounting something they did in a state of genuine panic. It sounds almost, rehearsed isn't the right word, but organized, considered. Analysts note that structured recall of chaotic moments isn't automatically suspicious. Some people are simply wired that way, but it is the kind of detail that investigators circle, that they return to, that they test against the physical landscape to see whether the described route is even feasible in the time Janie suggests it took. Because the land doesn't lie, the trees don't move, the dirt road sits exactly where it always has. And if the timeline of that search doesn't match what the terrain makes possible, investigators will know. Parts 3 and 4 are only the beginning. In parts 5 and 6, we're breaking down the nighttime raking claim, the social media siege, and what a potential family cover-up actually looks like under forensic examination. Subscribe right now and turn on notifications. This case is far from over. There are claims in this case that sound unusual the first time you hear them. And then you think about them for 30 more seconds, and they sound even more unusual. One of those claims is this. Janie McKenzie says she was raking the ground at night, not in the afternoon, not at dusk, at night, in the dark, to level the earth for a proposed swimming pool. Now, take a breath before you react, because the analytical move here isn't to immediately declare that's impossible or sinister. The analytical move is to ask the right questions. And when you ask the right questions about nighttime ground raking, you realize very quickly that this is one of the most physically verifiable claims in Janie's entire account. Here's why. Raking soil to level, it is not a subtle activity. It is not the kind of thing you do and leave no trace of. It requires tools, a rake, possibly a wheelbarrow, possibly a vehicle if the area is large. It disturbs the earth in very specific, very recognizable ways. It shifts leaf litter. It leaves linear drag marks in soil. It exposes subsurface layers. It creates tire tracks if equipment was involved. It requires light, a flashlight, a vehicle's headlights, a floodlight, something to see by in the dark. All of that leaves evidence. Physical, durable, investigator-readable evidence. Which means Janie's claim about raking at night is either one of the most easily confirmed details in this entire case, or one of the most easily disproven ones. There is very little gray area. Either the soil shows what raking looks like, in the right location, consistent, with the right time frame, or it doesn't. Deception analysts flag the specific. Claim is what they call a litmus test detail. A litmus test detail is a verifiable, concrete statement about a physical action that, when checked against the actual environment, tells investigators something definitive about the reliability of the broader narrative. If the nighttime raking happened, the land will show it. If the land shows no sign of it, no disturbed soil pattern, no tool drag lines, no evidence of ground leveling in that area, then something in Janie's account doesn't hold up. And when one concrete, testable claim doesn't hold up, investigators have to reassess everything around it. That's the forensic logic. Inconsistencies in routine, verifiable tasks are among the most telling. Indicators analysts look for. They either reflect genuine memory failure, time, passing and blurring ordinary activities into each other, or they suggest that a narrative was constructed after the fact, built around what someone needed to. Explain rather than what actually happened. Now let's talk about the tears. Because we cannot analyze this interview, honestly, without addressing the most emotionally powerful moment in it. Janie, sitting on that sawhorse bench, completely broken down, sobbing, blaming herself, saying that if she had only gotten up that morning, if she had only checked on Lily and Jack, none of this would have happened. It was raw. It was visceral. And for most people watching, it landed as real. But here is what deception analysts are very careful to articulate, and what the public almost universally gets wrong. Emotion is not evidence, not of guilt, not of innocence, not of anything except the presence of strong feeling in that moment. Genuine grief looks like what Janie displayed, but so does remorse, so does fear, so does the overwhelming stress of someone who knows more than they're saying and is buckled under the weight of it. The human nervous system does not produce tears in a way that allows us to decode the source. Crying is crying. It is real in the moment it happens. What it means is an entirely separate question, one that tears alone cannot answer. What investigators know is this: an emotionally devastated witness is also, neurologically speaking, an unreliable one. Extreme distress compresses and distorts memory. It causes people to conflate separate events, to compress timelines, to misplace details that felt certain in the moment. That is not deception, it is biology, which is why investigators cannot simply accept emotional testimony and move on. They have to anchor it. They Cross-reference it against phone records, against timestamps, against third-party accounts, against what cameras captured and what devices recorded. They build an objective skeleton around the emotional flesh of the testimony and see whether the two fit together. Because compassion and rigor are not opposites in an investigation. They are partners. You can honor someone's grief completely and still hold every word they say up to the light. And right now, every word in this case is being held up to that light. Imagine waking up every morning and reaching for your phone, only to find hundreds of strangers convince you, murdered 2 children, and buried them in your backyard. That is the reality Janie McKenzie says she has been living inside. And before we go any further, that reality deserves to be acknowledged honestly and without flinching. Because what happens to people caught in the crosshairs of a viral missing child case is not a small thing. It is psychologically devastating. It is socially annihilating. It can shatter families, destroy reputations, and drive people into complete isolation, regardless of whether those people did anything wrong at all. Janie described becoming fearful, withdrawn, afraid to move through public spaces, changing her routines, avoiding the kind of normal daily activity that, ironically, would have made her look less suspicious to the very people scrutinizing her every move. The accusations on Facebook were relentless. The TikTok videos were unforgiving. The YouTube comment sections turned into open courtrooms where strangers handed down verdicts based on 15-second clips and secondhand rumors. And here is the cruel paradox at the heart of all of it. The behaviors that public harassment produces, the withdrawal, the altered routines, the shutting down, the refusal to engage, are the exact same behaviors that guilt produces. They look identical from the outside, which means that the more aggressively the internet accused Janie, the more her natural response to that accusation looked like confirmation of it, a vicious, self-reinforcing cycle that benefits no one and actively poisons the investigation. Deception analysts are explicit about this dynamic. They have seen it derail cases before. When social media pressure becomes loud enough, it starts doing something genuinely dangerous. It contaminates the witness pool. People who might have come forward with neutral or even exculpatory information become afraid to speak. People who are genuinely innocent start acting in ways that appear evasive, and investigators who are trying to work methodically through verified evidence suddenly find themselves competing with a parallel public trial that runs on emotion and moves at the speed of a trending hashtag. That is why analysts and law enforcement consistently urge the same thing: restraint. Verified information only. Let the physical evidence lead. But here is where the social media dimension collides with something even more complex. The question of whether this family has been operating with a coordinated narrative. This is a theory that analysts say must be considered, not assumed. The possibility that multiple people connected to this case have aligned their stories, consciously or unconsciously, in ways that create a unified front rather than independent, organically consistent accounts. Analysts look for very specific fingerprints of coordination, identical phrasing across separate interviews, synchronized retractions, where multiple people walk back details at the same time without apparent communication, shared narrative pivots, where the story shifts in the same direction across multiple accounts simultaneously. These patterns, when they appear together, suggest rehearsal. They suggest that what sounds like independent confirmation is actually echo. But, and this is the part that requires intellectual honesty, coordinated behavior does not automatically mean coordinated deception. Families in crisis talk to each other. Traumatized people reach for the same language because they are processing the same experience. Shared grief produces shared vocabulary. A family that has been publicly accused of murdering children will naturally circle the wagons, align on what they remember, and present a unified front, not because they are lying, but because that is what frightened, grieving human beings do. The investigative challenge is one of the most demanding in forensic psychology. Analysts must determine whether matching Statements across multiple people are the product of deliberate collusion, stories rehearsed and synchronized before law enforcement arrived, or whether they're the natural echo of shared trauma reverberating through a family that is simply trying to survive an unimaginable situation. That distinction is everything. Legally, morally, investigatively. And it cannot be made by reading comment sections or watching YouTube breakdowns. It can only be made by patient, methodical cross-examination, testing each account against objective anchors, identifying where the stories align because truth aligns, and identifying where they align in ways that truth alone cannot explain. What makes this case so gripping and so genuinely difficult is that both possibilities remain open. The family may be innocent and terrified and closing ranks out of survival instinct, or the coordination may be something more calculated, more deliberate, more forensically significant. And right now, only the evidence knows which one it is. The investigators know what to look for. They know how coordinated deception eventually fractures, because it always does. People remember their own lived experience differently than they remember a constructed story. Under repeated, structured questioning, the seams begin to show. Details that were locked in the first interview start to shift. Certainties become uncertainties, and the fracture lines, when they appear, tell investigators exactly where to dig, literally and figuratively. We are one part away from the conclusion, and part 6 is where everything lands. The planted evidence theory, the forensic reckoning, and what this case teaches us about how the truth finally surfaces. Subscribe, share this video, and stay right here. The final piece is everything. Here is something that experience. Investigators know that the general public often doesn't. Staged evidence almost always unravels. Not because investigators are infallible, not because forensic science is perfect, but because the physical world operates according to rules that human beings, no matter how careful, no matter how calculated, cannot fully control or anticipate. Soil behaves in predictable ways. Decomposition follows a biological clock. Fibers transfer according to physics, not intention. And when someone places something where it shouldn't be, or removes something from where it was, or disturbs the earth and then tries to make it look undisturbed, the land remembers. The land always remembers. Deception analysts studying this case have drawn deliberate comparisons to prior investigations where evidence was later determined to have been staged or planted, not to suggest that has definitively happened here, but to illustrate how forensic science exposes it when it does. The telltale signatures are surprisingly consistent across cases. Inconsistent soil layering, where a dug and refilled patch shows geological strata that don't match the surrounding undisturbed earth. Fresh impression differences, where a footprint or tool mark shows weathering inconsistent with the timeline claimed. Fiber and trace material mismatches, where substances found in a location shouldn't be there based on established movement history of the people involved. These are not abstract concepts. They are readable, documentable, courtroom admissible facts. Take the footprint Janie described finding near the patio. If that impression was genuine, made by Lily or Jack in the hours before they disappeared, it would carry specific forensic characteristics. The depth would reflect the weight of a toddler on that particular substrate at that particular moisture level. The edges would show a specific deterioration pattern consistent with the time elapsed. The direction and stride pattern would suggest movement away from the house at a pace consistent with a small child walking or running. If those characteristics don't align with the claimed timeline, if the impression looks newer than it should or older, or if the dimensions don't match the children's known shoe sizes, forensic analysts will identify that discrepancy, and that discrepancy becomes a thread. Pull it hard enough and the whole fabric of the surrounding narrative can come apart. The same logic applies to the nighttime raking claim. If Janie raked that ground to level it for a pool, the soil in that specific area will show it. The disturbance pattern will be consistent with raking. The depth of disruption will match the tool used. The timing of the disruption, readable through soil settling and vegetation regrowth patterns, will align with when Janie says it happened. If all those things check out, The claim is corroborated. Case closed on that detail. But if the soil in that area shows no sign of raking, if the ground looks untouched or was disturbed in a way inconsistent with leveling work, if the disruption pattern suggests something other than what a rake produces, investigators will know, and they will not be able to unknow it. This is a forensic reckoning that every claim in this case is moving toward, not the court of public opinion, not the comment sections, not the viral breakdowns or the true crime podcasts. The actual, physical, scientifically verifiable reckoning between what people have said and what the earth, the structures, the devices, and the digital trail actually recorded. Because cameras captured footage, phones logged locations, cell towers registered signals, smart devices recorded sounds and motion. The digital skeleton of this case exists, time-stamped, unalterable, waiting to be fully assembled and read against every spoken account. And that is ultimately what separates this investigation from the noise surrounding it. The noise is loud. It is emotional. It is human and understandable and completely unable to produce answers. The physical record is quiet, patient, indifferent to what anyone wants the truth to be. And when investigators finish mapping that record against every statement, every claim, every timeline offered by every person connected to this case, the gaps will become visible. Some of those gaps will be explained by stress and grief and the imperfect machinery of human memory. Some of them will be explained by miscommunication, by the fog of a chaotic morning, by the natural way that trauma distorts recollection. And some of them, potentially, will not be explainable at all. That is the moment this case is building toward. Not a viral video, not a social media verdict, a forensic reckoning. Quiet, methodical, devastating in its precision. Lily and Jack Sullivan deserve that reckoning. They deserve investigators who follow the evidence without flinching, who test every claim without prejudice, and who refuse to let noise drown out the signal. They deserve a public that resists the intoxicating pull of speculation and instead preserves information, protects evidence, and trusts the process, even when that process is agonizingly slow. Small things will decide this case. The sound a door makes, the depth of a footprint, the drag lines left by a rake in the dark, the timestamp on a phone that someone forgot to leave behind. These are the details that look insignificant until the moment they become everything. The land knows what happened. The devices recorded what happened. And piece by piece, with patience and rigor and an absolute commitment to the truth, investigators are going to find out. If this breakdown gave you a clearer picture of what's really happening beneath the surface of this case, share this video right now with someone who's been following it. Subscribe and turn on every notification. Because the moment verified developments break, we will be here to break them down in plain language, without the noise, without the speculation, and without flinching. Lily and Jack Sullivan deserve the truth, and we are not going anywhere until it surfaces.